I was thinking about how we are conditioned to understand war. If you close your eyes and you picture national security, what's the first thing that pops into your head?
For most people, it's probably something from the movies. It's the situation.
Exactly. It's high drama. We picture, the generals in some dimly lit war room. They're poring over these tactical maps. Maybe there's smoke in the air. Well, probably not smoke anymore, but you get the vibe.
Right. You picture the prime minister or the president sitting at the head of a long, polished mahogany.
And they're making that grave, heavy call on the red phone, that decisive moment.
And then, the camera immediately cuts to the field.
Right. And cuts to the soldiers, the guys in the mud, the pilots in the cockpit. We imagine them making those split-second life-or-death decisions that are supposed to determine the fate of the nation.
It's a very clear picture. It's very vertical, a very clear hierarchy. The elected leader decides what we're going to do.
And the military executes how we're going to do it. Simple.
That is the classic textbook definition of how power works in a democracy. And, it's comforting.
It is comforting.
It implies that the people we actually vote for are the ones steering the ship, and the people with the guns are, they're just following orders.
But what if I told you that according to the stack of documents we have in front of us today, that whole picture is, it's basically a fairy tale. It's a comforting bedtime story we tell ourselves so we can all sleep at night.
That's a bold start to our deep dive.
It is. But look at the source material we're going through. What if the real power, the actual architecture of the modern battlefield, isn't determined by the guy with the ranks on his shoulder? And it's definitely not determined by the guy sitting in the cabinet meeting.
You're suggesting the power lies somewhere else, somewhere completely different.
I'm talking about the architect in the shadow. That is the phrase that just kept jumping out at me as I was going through all this research. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a figure who, for most people, even, people who are total news junkies, is probably just a name they might have scrolled past in some text-heavy article.
Sharon Afek.
Sharon Afek. Yeah, it's not a name that commands immediate recognition like a prime minister or a chief of staff would.
Not at all.
He's not a politician. He's not a famous combat general.
No, he's a lawyer.
Specifically, he is the former military advocate general in Hebrew, that's the Patsar, and currently he serves as a very, very high-ranking deputy attorney general.
And the entire premise of the source material we're looking at today, which we should be clear, comes from a very expensive, really explosive expose by Channel 14 titled Who is Sharon Afek, is that this man, this technocrat, wields more actual influence over the Israeli military and the day-to-day security of the nation than almost anyone else in the country. It's a fascinating and honestly, a somewhat disturbing thesis. The source material argued that what we're witnessing is this fundamental shift in the very mechanics of modern government. It posits that the center of gravity, the place where the real decisions, the ones that truly matter, are made. It's moved. It has shifted from what they call the field.
So that's the soldiers, the commanders, the settlers, the elected officials.
All of them, yes. It's shifted from the field to the system.
And the system, according to this, isn't run by people who get voted in.
No. The system is run by legal advisors operating, as the source puts it, in the shadows. It's the rise of the legalocracy.
It's the clerks versus the commander. And according to this deep dive, the clerks aren't just winning. They've effectively conquered the castle and changed all the locks.
Or maybe they've just rewritten the rule book so that the castle can't possibly function without them in the first.
That's a great way to put it. Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack this specific expose. We are going to dig into the allegations that Sharon Afek didn't just interpret the law, which is, his job description, but that he fundamentally shifted the norms of the entire Israeli military.
We're talking about placing legal interpretation above operational necessity.
And above political will, the will of the voters.
And we absolutely have to talk about the cost, because this isn't just some academic discussion about legal theory. This isn't happening in a vacuum. The source claims this shift has had a chilling, even deadly effect on the ground.
Right. When you change the rules of engagement from a conference room in Tel Aviv, it directly changes how a 19-year-old soldier pulls a trigger in a dark alleyway.
The stakes couldn't be higher.
So let's start with the man himself, who is Sharon Afek. Because reading through this, the source doesn't paint him as some cartoon villain, curling a mustache.
No, and that's what makes the profile so interesting. He isn't portrayed as malicious in a criminal sense. He's described as a child of the system.
That phrase suggests he's homegrown, not an outside.
It means he didn't come from somewhere else. He didn't have a big career in the private sector, and he certainly didn't come from the combat. He grew up professionally speaking, entirely inside the Military Advocate General's Corps. He is a product of that one very specific...
And the source argues that this environment, the MAG Corps, it isn't just a standard law firm or, a government department. It's a closed loop, a closed system with a very specific DNA.
That word DNA is so crucial here. It implies a kind of biological imperative, something that is passed down and can't be measured in from the outside. The claim is that the Military Advocate General's Corps breeds a very specific type of... Yes, an organizational culture where people like Sharon Afek, his predecessor Doron Ben-Barak, and his successor Yifat Tomer Yershami, who is the current Menji, they replace one another in what feels like a dynastic succession.
So it's like a relay race where everyone is on the exact same team, just handing the baton to the next person who thinks exactly like they do.
Precisely. And that ensures that the core policy, the underlying philosophy, never actually changes, regardless of who is technically in charge or, more importantly, who is in the government at that moment.
And the source argues that this specific DNA is distinct from and perhaps even hostile to the DNA of the rest of the military.
Oh, absolutely.
How so? What's the conflict there?
Well, think about the DNA of a combat unit. What is it focused on? It's focused on victory. It's focused on neutralizing threats, on protecting the border, on aggression in the face of danger. It's about mission accomplishment.
Right.
But the MAG Corps, according to this critique, is focused on something else entirely, something different.
International law, the opinion of the High Court at The Hague.
That, yes, but also shaping norms. There is a really, really striking quote in the source material describing how Afek operates. It says, and I'm quoting here, "In the dark, one can do the most complex thing without being exposed to disinfecting sunlight."
Without being exposed to disinfecting sunlight.
Right.
That is, well, that's the complete opposite of what we usually hear. We're always told that sunlight is the best disinfectant, that transparency is the bedrock of democracy.
Right, of course. The argument here is that Afek realized something very pragmatic about power. If you try to make massive changes to societal norms or military rules out in the open, say, in the Knesset or in a big public debate, you face immediate and powerful resistance.
You face the voters. You face the messiness and the noise of democracy. People scream, they protest, they vote you out of office.
Exactly. But if you make those decisions in the dark, within the quiet, bureaucratic machinery of legal opinions, internal directives, and classified consultation, you can achieve these complex shifts in policy without anyone really noticing until it's already a done deal.
So it's a stealth takeover. A bureaucratic maneuver.
It's a way of bypassing the friction of public. The source claims that the center of decision-making has shifted from the commanders in the field to the clerks in the office. And this is where this concept of the North Star...
Marking north. Yeah, talk about that.
Yeah. The source argues that Afek doesn't view his job as simply judging individual cases, determining if soldier X was guilty or innocent based on... He sees his role as marking. It means he uses specific legal cases not just to resolve that particular dispute, but to signal to the entire army and really the entire society what the new norms should be going forward.
So he's not just interpreting the law. He's actively trying to educate or maybe re-educate the army.
He is instilling a worldview. He's setting a precedent that changes behavior down the line. And the source claims he does this regardless of what the political leadership, the people who are actually elected, actually wants.
This brings us to a really helpful analogy the source used, which I thought was brilliant. The commercial lawyer.
It's the best way to understand the core of the... Imagine you are a CEO of a major company. You go to your corporate lawyer and you say, I want to acquire this competitor.
Okay.
A good lawyer tells you how they draft the contracts, the regulations, they find the legal loopholes, they facilitate your will. They are there to make it happen.
They don't turn to you and say, no, I don't think you should buy that company because I personally disagree with their business model. That's not their job.
Right. The lawyer works for the client. The client sets the goal. The lawyer clears the path. But the accusation against Afek and the legal system he represents is that they crossed that fundamental line, stopped being the facilitators, and they...
So instead of telling the political echelon or the military commanders how to execute a policy, say how to engage an enemy or how to manage a territory, they started determining if the policy should be executed at all.
They are using the law not as a tool for enablement, but as a veto. They're using it to enforce their own policy preferences.
And to really understand how this plays out in the real world, because this can all sound very abstract and theoretical, we have to look at what the source calls the constitutive event.
The defining moment.
Yes, the source material points to one specific event that really defines Afek's entire tenure and this whole shift in power, the Elor Azaria case.
A Hebron shooter case. Yes, even if you don't follow the day-to-day day-to-day news in Israel. You probably heard about this. It was a global headline. It was everywhere.
And the source claims this is the pivot point. If you want to understand their argument about Sharon Afek, you have to understand their reading of the Elor Azaria incident. And we need to slow down here. We really need to look at the details because the context is absolutely everything.
It is.
So let's set the scene. We're in Hebron. The year is 2015.
And it is the absolute height of what was called the Knife Intifada. And we need to try and recall what that actually felt like on the ground. It was a period of extremely high tension paranoia. It wasn't organized battalions attacking. It was individuals waking up in the morning, grabbing a kitchen knife or a screwdriver, and going out to kill.
The psychological terror was immense. You didn't know if the person standing next to you at the bus stop or in line at the supermarket was about to pull a knife.
Exactly. So the security forces were on a hair-trigger alert. They were exhausted mentally and physically. And Hebron. Hebron is always the boiling. It's the most tense place.
So on this specific day, in the Tel Rumeida neighborhood, 2 terrorists launch a coordinated attack on a soldier.
Right. They stab a soldier. The other troops in the area react immediately. They open fire. One terrorist is killed instantly. The other, a man named Abdel Fattah al-Sharif, is wounded and he falls to the ground.
And then Elor Azaria, who is a medic, arrives on the scene a few moments later.
Now, according to the source, and they are very, very specific about the facts as they view them, Azaria isn't just standing there passive. He identifies that the wounded terrorist is still moving. He's not inert. And
not just moving. The source makes a huge point of highlighting the context of the threat perception at that exact moment.
Yeah.
It was a hot day in Hebron.
Unseasonably warm, yes. Yet the terrorist was wearing a heavy, black, puffy coat, a winter jacket.
Which, in that specific security context, is a massive, flashing red flag.
It screams suicide vest. It's the #1 indicator. Why would you wear a winter coat in the heat unless you are concealing something bulky underneath it? The suspicion of an IED, an improvised explosive device, was incredibly high.
And hadn't there been warnings about this tactic?
Yes, specific intelligence warnings about combined attacks. Stab first to draw in a crowd of medics and first responders, and then detonate the vest to maximize casualties.
So Azaria arrives. He sees the movement. He sees the coat. He hears shouts from civilians and other soldiers on the scene, people yelling about a possible bomb. He perceives an immediate, clear, and present danger to everyone around him.
So he takes action. He cocks his weapon. He aims. He fires one shot to the head, in his words, to remove the danger.
And that one single shot set off a chain reaction that, according to the source, essentially broke the spirit of the Israeli military. Because almost immediately a video comes out.
Released by B'Tselem, which is a well-known left-wing human rights organization. The video goes viral globally within hours, and the optics are terrible. It looks like an execution. It shows a soldier shooting a man who's lying on the ground. And this is where the system kicks in with full force.
And the source is incredibly critical of the leadership here, the political and military leadership, before there was even a proper investigation, before anyone really knew what Azaria saw or thought or felt. The big guns came out.
The chief of staff at the time, Gadi Eisenkot, and the minister of defense, Moshe Yaalon, they went to the Knesset podium and condemned Azaria almost immediately. They called him a soldier who sinned.
A soldier who's... That is such a specific choice of words. It's moral, it's almost biblical, it's not a legal term.
It's a verdict, it's a prejudgment. The source argues that by doing this, by saying that from the floor of the parliament, they effectively doomed Azaria. Just think about the military hierarchy. If the chief of staff, the commander of all commanders, says this guy is a sinner, how can a lower-ranking military judge possibly give him a fair trial?
Of course. Who is going to contradict the chief of staff?
It signaled to the entire system, we want this guy's head on a platter.
And Sharon Afek, as the military advocate general, was the man who had to deliver it.
The source explicitly blames Afek for escalating this. They say this could have been, and arguably should have been, a disciplinary hearing. You know, of a field operational error. Maybe he shouldn't have shot. Maybe he misread the situation. But you deal with that inside the unit. You learn. You don't turn it into a national circle.
But Afek didn't do that. He took it to a criminal trial. Initially, they were looking at murder. Then it became manslaughter.
A huge...
And there's this detail that really stuck out to me in the report. This feels significant. Afek hired a private lawyer to prosecute the soldier.
Yes, a man named Adav Weiss. The source describes this as highly aggressive and highly unusual. The military prosecution has plenty of its own. Bringing in a high-powered private attorney signaled that they were going for the throat. They weren't just seeking justice, they were seeking a conviction at all costs.
It feels like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It's a show of force.
It was a statement, absolutely. Yeah. And the investigation itself, the source uses this analogy. They compare Azaria to a bar mitzvah boy not invited to his own party.
That's a striking image. What do they mean by that?
They mean that Azaria wasn't included in the official operation. Now, in the military, a debrief is conducted after every major to learn less what went right, what went wrong tactic. It's supposed to be a a protected space for soldiers to speak the truth without fear of problem.
Okay, so he's excluded from that.
He was completely excluded from this process, and yet the prosecution used the results of that very debrief against.
Wow, so he's locked out of the learning process, but the process itself is weaponized against him.
Exactly. It seems the deck was stacked from the very beginning. The prosecution's entire case rested on the claim that the terrorist was neutralized, but the defense, and the source backs this up, insisted there was a clear and present movement, code warning.
But this brings us to the big question, the why. Why go this hard on a 19-year-old medic in Hebron? Why turn a chaotic field incident into a national and international show trial?
The source suggests two primary reasons. One is international pressure.
The Hague, the ICC.
The rush to appease the International Criminal Court. The idea is, look, world, we prosecute our own. We are tough on our soldier. We have a functioning legal system, so you don't need to intervene. We've got this.
So Azaria was a sacrificial lamb for the international community.
That's the argument. He was the fall guy offered up to protect the generals and politicians from international warrants. But the second reason is perhaps more profound, and it goes back to that North Star concept we talked about earlier. Yeah. The source claims Afek used Azaria as a constitutive event, a teaching moment to re-educate the entire army.
He wanted to make an example of him, a public example.
He wanted to change the norm. He wanted to establish in no uncertain terms that the strict, cold, legal interpretation of the word neutralized overrides the soldier's subjective feeling of danger in the heat of the moment. He sacrificed the individual soldier to send a powerful message to the entire. The rules have changed. Your gut instinct is no longer enough. The lawyers are in charge now.
And boy, was that message received.
Loud and clear. Frighteningly clear.
This brings us to the next section, what the source calls the chilling effect. Because the source says that 10 years later, you can still feel the damage from this one case. The spirit of the fighters, they claim, has been broken.
There's a quote here that is frankly shocking. I had to read it 2 or 3 times to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting. The source says, and this is a direct quote from someone they interviewed, fighters fear the military advocate general more than they fear Yahweh.
Whoa. Let's just pause on that for a second. More than the leader of Hamas. More than the guy who is actively, openly trying to kill them. That's a huge claim.
It sounds hyperbolic, but think about the psychology behind it. A soldier expects the enemy to try to kill them. That's the job. That's the contract of war. It's understood. But a soldier expects their own system, their own commanders, their own legal corps to have their back.
To support them when things get messy, when it's not black and white.
Right. When that trust is fundamentally broken, when the soldier feels that a mistake made in a split second of terror, prison to public humiliation, to being branded a sinner by their own side, that creates a kind of paralysis that is far more terrifying than any.
Operational hesitation. That's the term for it.
Exactly. Soldiers are now afraid to open fire. They are second-guessing themselves in the most critical moment. If I shoot, will I be the next Elor Azaria? Will my face be all over the news? Will I go to jail? Will my family be shot?
And the source gives specific, tragic examples of where this hesitation led to U soldiers dying. It's not just a theoretical concept. Talk to us about Beryl Hadaria's.
This was a heartbreaking case, just awful. Beryl was a sniper, a border police sniper stationed at the Gaza border wall. A terrorist, part of a violent riot, approached the wall right up to his firing point blank.
And Beryl had him in his sights. He could have taken the shot.
He did. He absolutely had him. But Beryl hesitated to shoot. Why? The source claims it was because of the restrictive and confusing rules of engagement, the ROE. He was afraid to pull the trigger because the legal constraints were so confusing and the threat of prosecution so real. He didn't want to go to jail.
And in that moment of hesitation,
the terrorist pulled out a pistol and shot him through the loophole in the wall. Beryl.
So the argument is that the legal protection that was put in place actually cost him his life.
Yes. The source argues that the ROE have become so complex, so lawyer-driven, that they effectively handcuff the soldiers on the front line. They create a defensive democracy in the wrong sense. It's defensive of the lawyers in the system, not protecting the country.
There's also that viral video of the ramming attack where the soldiers were seen running away.
Right. A car is barreling towards a group of soldiers, a clear terror attack in progress. Instead of neutralizing the threat, instead of firing their weapons, they fled. They scrambled out of the way to save themselves. The source alleges they ran because they were terrified of a military police investigation if they used their weapons on the driver.
That is a fundamental inversion of the military ethos. Yeah. And you run towards the fire, not away from it. That's rule number 1.
But what if the fire isn't just bullets, but subpoenas? What if the fire is a legal system that views you as a suspect first, first and a defender second. That completely changes the calculus in the soldier's brain in that split second.
The source uses a very harsh label for the Mag Corps. They call it the attorney for the...
It's a harsh label, but you can understand the critique behind it. The argument is that the legal system has begun to prioritize the rights of the end, ensuring terrorists have lawyers, ensuring strict adherence to international protocols over the immediate safety and morale of the IDF. They act as prosecutors of their own soldiers rather than as their defenders.
It's like the system's immune response has turned inward on itself. The legal mechanism is attacking the operational mechanism.
And this isn't just happening on the battlefield with guns and bullets. The source claims it's happening in the courtroom with land. This brings us to the war on...
Right, because Sharon Afek's influence wasn't just limited to shooting in. The source claims he played a huge and very active role in the legal battles over Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank.
This is where we get into the really technical bureaucratic machinery of the occupation or the administration of the territory. The source highlights a specific legal tool called the disruptive order. The official name is Order 15.
Disruptive use. It sounds incredibly boring. It sounds like a zoning violation for having a loud party or something.
That's the point. It sounds boring and technical, so no one pays attention. Bureaucracy loves boring names for powerful, but the source claims Afek used this order as a powerful weapon against the settlement.
Okay, so how does it work?
So traditionally, if there is a land dispute, you go, someone says, this is my land, the other person's my land, and you bring evidence. You bring maps from the Ottoman era, you bring witnesses. It takes years. It's called due process.
And Order 1586 changes that.
Order 1586 allows the military administration to evict Israelis from land in Judea and Samaria, not because a Palestinian has come forward and proven they, but simply because the administration claims the settler is disrupting the usage of the land.
Wait, so you don't need a proven owner to kick the settler out? That sounds like that's a big deal.
No. It can be used even on private land disputes or on land with ambiguous status, like state. It's described in the source as a draconian tool. It completely bypasses the need for a long evidentiary trial about who actually owns. It just allows for swift eviction. It reverses the burden of proof.
And the source says Afek expanded the use of this order dramatically.
Yes, that he used it far more expansively and aggressively than his predecessor. And this feeds directly into what the source calls the ping pong.
This is a fascinating description of how the legal left in Israel operates, according to the source. They call it a circular relationship designed specifically to bypass the government.
It's a three-part system.
Okay, walk us through the circle. How do you bypass an elected government using a game of ping pong?
Step 1. A left-wing NGO organizations, often funded by European government, petitions the High Court of Justice, known as Beget. They file a petition saying, hey, this outpost, let's say Migron or Amona, is illegal. You must order the state to evict them. That's the serve.
Okay, step 2, the return.
The court turns to the state and asks for a response. State of Israel, what is your position on this? Is this outpost legal or not? The ball is now in the state's court.
And step 3, this is where Afek comes in.
Exact. The state needs legal advice to formulate its response to the court. Who gives that advice? The military advocate general and the attorney general's office? People like Sharon Afek.
And what does he advise?
Afek advises the state, yes, from a purely legal standpoint, we should evacuate. Legally problematic. So the state's lawyers go back to the court and say, we agree with the petitioners, we must evacuate.
So the court says, well, if the state agrees, then there's no dispute. Here is the court order, and the settlers are kicked out.
Exactly. It's a perfect closed loop. The NGO serves, the state's lawyer, Afek, sets it up, and the court smashes it home. The NGO, the court, and the legal advisor are all playing ping pong with each other. And where is the elected official in this loop?
Nowhere to be seen. The Minister of Defense or the Prime Minister might want to support the settlement. They might have been elected on a platform that specifically promised to support settlement.
But it doesn't matter. The legal advisor tells the court, no, legally we have to evacuate. The elected official is completely cut out of the decision. Their hands are tied.
It's ingenious. In a very cynical way. It's policy laundering.
That's a great term for it, yes. You take a political desire to remove settlements, you wash it through this supposedly neutral legal process, and it comes out the other side as a binding court order that no politician can touch.
They can just throw up their hands and say, sorry, voters, the court ordered it. But the source is saying that actually the clerk invited the order in the first place.
That is precisely the deep state argument, the source, that the unelected legal bureaucracy is implementing its own policy completely independent of and often contrary to the will of the vote.
Which brings us to the attitude behind all of this. The source uses a very strong word, hubris.
Yes, the club mentality.
Explain that.
The source portrays the legal leadership Afek, the current Attorney General Gali Baharov Mira, Deputy AG Gil Limon, and others as an elite social club, a closed circle of people who all went to the same schools, worked in the same offices, and who believe that they are the state.
They see themselves as the guardians of the gate.
the guardians who must save the state from itself, or more specifically, save the state from the ignorant masses and the populist politicians, those masses.
There's a specific mention in the material of the Aaron Barak school of thought.
Aaron Barak is the former president of the Supreme Court and really the father of judicial activism in Israel. His famous philosophy is that everything is justice. There is no issue, political, military, social, economic, that the court cannot rule on.
The ultimate check on power.
The source argues that Afek is a devoted disciple of this. It's the belief that the legal system is the supreme moral and constitutional authority, higher than the Knesset, higher than the army, higher than the...
And this hubris, this sense of being above the rules while enforcing them on others, led to what the source calls the home visit scandal.
This is a specific incident that the source uses to illustrate what they see as a glaring double.
So Sharon Afek, who is now the Deputy Attorney General, visits the home of the current Military Advocate General, Yifat Tomer Yerushalmi.
Correct. Now, at the time, there was a very sensitive investigation going on regarding leaks or misconduct within the legal system itself. The court had actually ruled that no one from the prosecution should handle that specific investigation due to major conflicts of interest. It was a messy internal situation involving the top brass.
But Afek goes to her house anyway while this is all happening.
He goes to her private, socializing for an hour and a half, according.
Now, in any other context, two colleagues hanging out isn't exactly front page news.
Of course not. But in the legal world, specifically when there are active court rulings about conflicts of interest in play, this is seen as a major breach of norms. It violates the appearance of impartiality. It looks terrible, and the source calls it out as rank hypocrisy.
Because they are so incredibly strict with soldiers. You violated protocol, you go to jail, you looked at a terrorist the wrong way, we're opening an investigation. But when they themselves violate protocol...
It's just friends having coffee. Nothing to see here. Move along. The source argues it reinforces the idea that there is one set of rules for the club and another, much harsher set of the rest of the country, especially for soldiers and settlers. They protect their own.
And that protection, the source argues, extends to career advancement. This is the deep state thesis in its purest form.
The source makes the argument that to get ahead in the Israeli legal, to become a judge on the Supreme Court, to become the Attorney General, you have to signal your allegiance to this specific worldview, which they call an extreme left.
You used to punch your ticket to get into the club.
And how do you punch your ticket? How do you show you're on the right? By prosecuting soldiers like Elor Azaria, by freezing settlements, by recommending evacuations to the High Court. These actions are viewed, according to the source, as resume building.
So if you are a military lawyer who is seen as being too pro-soldier or too pro-settler,
you simply won't get promoted. You won't make it to the Supreme Court. You will never become the Military Advocate General. The system naturally filters out anyone who thinks different.
So it creates this homogenous elite. An echo chamber. Everyone thinks the same, everyone acts the same, everyone went to the same schools, and everyone covers for each other. It's an ideological echo chamber that holds all the keys to the legal.
And meanwhile, the public keeps going to the polls and voting for right-wing governments.
That's the fundamental disconnect, isn't it? The source laments that while the public votes, right, the operating software, the state, ensures that left-wing policies are the ones that actually get enforced.
Operating software. That's such a powerful metaphor for this.
It really is.
It implies that the hardware, the parliament, the ministers, the voting booth, it doesn't really matter. You can change the hardware all you want. But if the code that is running the machine, the legal precedents, the directives, the bureaucratic norms, if that code was written by Aaron Barak and is implemented by people like Sharon Afek, then the output will always...
The source contrasts substantive democracy with the simple will of the voter.
Right. Substantive democracy is the idea that democracy isn't just about majority rule. It's about protecting certain core values, human rights, minority rights, the rule of law. And legal elites argue that they are the protectors of that substantive democracy. They are the guardians.
But the source argues that this is just a fancy academic way of saying we know better than the voters.
Exactly. If substantive democracy means overruling the expressed will of the people over and over and over again, then is it really a democracy anymore? That's the profound question they are posing. They argue it's an oligarchy of lawyers masking itself in the language of democracy. It's rule by the wise, not rule by the...
So let's try to pull all of this together. We've looked at the man, we've looked at the cases, the land disputes, and the underlying philosophy. What is the final indictment of Sharon Afek here, according to...
The final indictment is that Sharon Afek is a brilliant, talented, and effective legal mind who, according to this source, used his immense power to prioritize international approval and a specific progressive ideology over what they say is the most basic duty of the state, the safety of its soldiers and the sovereign will of its people.
The source claims he broke the spirit of the army, that he fundamentally made soldiers afraid to...
Yes, and that he built a legal architecture in the shadows that allows unelected clerks to effectively run the country, bypassing the messy, inconvenient, and often loud business of democratic politics.
It really forces you to ask, who actually runs the show? Who is in charge?
Is it the person you see on the news shaking hands with foreign leaders? Or is it the person you never see, the one drafting the crucial legal opinion in a back office?
The person determining the if, not just the how.
Precise. And in a country like Israel, which is in a perpetual state of conflict, this isn't an academic question. The distance between a legal opinion and a life or death situation is zero. A memo written in an office in Tel Aviv directly dictates whether a soldier lives or dies in Gaza or Jenin.
We started this deep dive with the image of the general and the politician in the war. But maybe the real picture we should be holding in our head is the lawyer with the red pen, striking out a line in the rules of engagement.
The architect in the shadow. That's who the source says in charge.
It leaves us with a final, very provocative thought. The source suggests that sunlight is the disinfectant, that these decisions need to be dragged out into the open for public debate. But there's a counter-argument to that. Maybe you need technocrats to stop populists from doing crazy.
That is the eternal tension in any democracy. We want the rule of law. We don't want soldiers acting like vigilantes. We don't want a government that ignores fundamental. Nobody wants that.
But at what point does the rule of law become simply the rule of lawyers?
And at what point does that legal purity, that desire for a perfect process, become operational paralysis in the battle?
The source poses the question, does sunlight disinfect, or does it paralyze those who have to make split-second decisions in the dark?
If a soldier hesitates for that critical second because he's thinking about a courtroom in his home country instead of the immediate threat in front of him, the price for that is the grim, unavoidable calculation.
It's a heavy takeaway. It certainly makes you look at every news story about a court ruling or a change in the rules of engagement completely differently. You start to see the invisible strings being pulled.
And you start to realize that the modern battlefield isn't just mud and tank drones. It's also paper, precedents, and legal.
Well, that is certainly a lot to process. Huge thank you to the Deep Dive team for digging up this material and laying it all out for us. It's a perspective we don't often hear presented in such granular...
It's crucial to look under the hood of power, even if you don't always like what you find there.
Absolutely. To our listener, thank you for staying with us on this journey into the shadows. We'll be back next time with another stack of sources and another deep dive. Until then, stay curious.
And keep asking questions.
Bye for now.